We have different economic systems. And these economic systems are used to allocate the scarce resources. So remember, with economics, you have a limited amount of scarce resources, the finite amount that must be allocated across the society. And then how do we actually allocate those resources? There's these different economic systems that allow us to do that. And each one of these economic systems must answer 5 questions. What are we going to produce? How are we going to produce? How much are we going to produce? When are we going to produce, and for whom are we going to produce these products? So each economic system must answer these 5 questions. Now we're going to talk about 2 different economic systems that are on opposite ends of the spectrum. The first one that we're going to talk about is known as capitalism, or also known as a free market or a price determination market. So capitalism, or under free market, the citizens own their own resources. They use the resources how they choose to use them. And there's often minimal to no legal constraints. So under capitalism, you own your own resources, you get to decide how to use those resources, and there's really no legal restraints as to how you use those resources. So how do you determine how you use those resources? Well, you determine them based off of the price. You see, price signals the value of these resources in capitalism. And then the price of the resource determines how you use it or how much you use it. It also helps determine what you're going to produce and how you're going to produce it. And this price determination is actually being done through what Adam Smith, which is the founder, or often considered the founder of modern economics, founder of capital, or of the economic system of capitalism, he called it the invisible hand. And what he said is that if all individuals are acting in their own self-interest through competition, the prices are going to basically fluctuate to truly represent the value of that good or service. So the prices, if the prices rise or the prices fall or however the prices change, it's being done by what seems like an invisible hand. And under that invisible hand is being run by all of the producers and consumers acting in their own self-interest. And they're acting in their own self-interest, and they're using those resources how they choose in order to either maximize their profit or their satisfaction, depending on if you're a producer or consumer. So whenever we said that this economic system, this free market economic system, must answer those 5 questions, we say, what are we going to produce? Well, that's determined by what's going to yield the highest profit, determined by price. How are we going to produce it? In the most efficient manner, because that lowers our cost. That's also being run off of price. How much? Well, depends on how much is going to yield the highest amount of profit. When are we going to produce? In agriculture, we're often limited by the weather as far as when we're going to produce, but we also produce when we are going to try and yield the highest profit. Again, prices are driving that. And for whom are we going to produce? Who we're going to produce for is, frankly, who's willing to buy it. So again, prices play into that for whom aspect. Now, if we look at the complete opposite end of the spectrum, remember, capitalism is minimal to no legal constraints. So basically free of government interference, and it's purely just people acting in their own self-interest. And that helps determine the prices. On the other end of the spectrum, we have socialism or communism. This is also known as the command system. Under the command system, the resources are owned by the government. Not only are they owned by the government, but the government decides how to use these resources. The prices, they're set by the government, not by the markets. So a good might not truly have the right value associated with it because the government is setting that price. And then the government answers all 5 of these questions. So what are you going to produce? Well, frankly, it's the government telling you what you're going to produce. How you're going to produce it and how much you're going to produce. Well, it's the government telling you all that. When you're going to produce it and for whom are you going to produce? Again, it's the government that's telling you all these things. The government decides and answers all 5 of these questions. Now, both capitalism and socialism or communism are both different types of ideologies. And everybody, well, you could argue left or right or plus or minus on either one about whether or not they're right or wrong or good or bad. And everybody has their own analysis of both capitalism, socialism, and communism. We're not going to dive into that, but I am going to talk a little bit about what Thomas Piketty said, who's a French economist. He argues that wealth inequality leads to stagnant or a declining economy. And what he's saying is that for an economy to truly survive, that there must be equality in wealth and that everybody is essentially making around the same money. Well, this is known as socialism or communism. So he argues that. Now he could argue that, and somebody could argue, well, capitalism increases trade, or however you decide to argue it. We're not going to get into that in this lecture, but just know that there are different thought processes about both, and I encourage you to look them up on your own and figure out which one you believe in more. But I will say that this inequality, we needed a way to measure inequality of wealth. So they came up with the Gini coefficient. Actually, came up before Thomas Piketty came up, and it was developed, and this coefficient measures the equality and distribution of wealth. How well is wealth distributed within a nation or in a region? And if you come up with a coefficient of 0, that means complete equality, meaning everybody within this nation owns the same, they have the same wealth, they're on the same level as far as everything goes. Whereas a 1 shows a complete inequality, meaning that maybe 1 or 2 people own all the wealth, or 1 person owns all the wealth, and everybody else essentially owns nothing. Just to give you a perspective, the United States recently is right around 1.47. Actually, they're a little bit higher than that according to recent studies, but just know that, to give you a perspective, the equality distribution in the United States is about this number, to kind of show how this all lines out. So let me ask you this. Where does the United States stand as far as a free market or a command system? Well, we use a little bit of both. We actually have what's known as a mixed economic system. What that means is that the markets are not entirely free to determine prices. Some markets are not, but other markets are entirely free. So this mixed economy, this mixed economic system, means that some markets determine prices and some do not. So in the United States, let's look at how it kind of interacts together and how we can actually say, well, we don't have totally free markets to determine prices. Well, if we look at agriculture, the government is involved in agriculture through things such as food stamps, WIC, and other governmental programs. They used to subsidize agriculture very heavily as well. Well, through that government interference, that allows the government to help almost manipulate prices to a certain extent. So that means that, yes, we do rely on the markets for the majority of the time, but there is a little bit of government influence as well that keeps this market not entirely free to determine price. Another aspect here in the United States where you see a lot more of this command system is the allocation of public goods, or the social goods. So if, as far as public schools go, if there weren't public schools and there weren't the United States allocating resources and dictating where these resources are going, we would not have public schools. And the only schools we would have is private schools that you would have to pay for your kid to enroll in it. Now, that would deteriorate the public school system in the United States. Another aspect is we probably wouldn't have parks. See, the parks are often being allocated by government, the resources go to that, and if we didn't have the government doing those public parks, we might have private parks, but there wouldn't be any governmental public parks for you to go sit in. Another aspect of the command system that we see in the United States is the allocation of resources towards national defense, the police department, fire department. All of those are public goods that are being funded by the government. But even though I've been kind of talking about a lot of this command system aspect, the majority of the markets in the United States do fall under this free market. For the majority of the time, the United States allows these markets to be free and only step in really and truly where they need to, and that's mainly in these public goods.